Hi guys, hope you all doing well, and this will be the fourth video of the entire series that I will be creating for multi-factor authentication server. And this video will be the second part of the ADFS configuration. So what do I mean by this? That how you can use on-prem MFA server with ADFS and how all the applications that are using ADFS as a claim provider, how for those particular application you can configure second factor authentication. Now, in the previous video, what we have done is we have actually used a scenario wherein we installed a multi-factor authentication server on the same machine on which we have ADFS configured. For this particular demo, what we are going to do is we have ADFS machine and we have a different machine on which we have installed multi-factor authentication server. Now, in order to proceed with this particular architecture or with this particular layout, there is a prerequisite that has to be completed, and that is that on your MFA server, you should have multi-factor authentication Web Service SDK installed. So as you can see that I have launched multi-factor authentication server and I have clicked on Web Service SDK. And now when I will click on install Web Service SDK, it will be installed. Now you can install Web Service SDK on a different machine as well, or you can use the same machine on which you have user portal, or if you want, you can also install Web Service SDK on ADFS machine. Instead of installing the entire MFA server, what you can do is you can install Web Service SDK on ADFS machine and then you can register MFA adapter for ADFS. But what I'm doing is I'm using the MFA server machine to install Web Service SDK, and then we will simply register the MFA adapter on the ADFS machine. I think this is something which is more easier in terms of configuration. So what I'm doing is I'm using the MFA server itself. Now, what I'll do is I'll click on install Web Service SDK. But before we begin with the installation, one very important part that has to be covered, and that is that installation of Web Service SDK does have some prerequisites. And in the second video of the series, which I will be listing in the description, that is actually configuring user portal. In that particular video, I have briefly covered about each and every prerequisite that you need to proceed with the installation of Web Service SDK. But for this particular demo, a short overview, and that is that this component has a dependency on IIS. So make sure that when you install IIS, you select the option of IIS Database Compatibility 6.0. You should also select the option of basic authentication, and this does has a dependency on .NET Framework 4.5 or above. So if you want to know more about prerequisites, you can watch that installation of user portal first. Just complete the Web Service SDK part, come back to this video, and we'll proceed from here. Now, since for this demo, I have already completed the prerequisite part, and what I'll do now, I will simply click on install Web Service SDK. The very next prompt that you will get will be a notification or the first step of the installation, wherein you will be notified that there will be a addition. The installer will install multi-factor authentication Web Service SDK to the following web location. Now, as you can see, it is selecting the default website because this particular machine has IIS installed already. It is choosing the site, the default website, and by default, it is also going to default application pool. If you want, you can choose a different pool as well, but for this demo, I'm using everything which is default. I'll click on next, and that's all. No more configuration is required when it comes to the installation process. Now, the moment you will refresh this, the install Web Service SDK will get changed to remove Web Service SDK. What does this mean? That the Web Service SDK is installed successfully. The next thing that we are going to do now is we'll go ahead and launch IIS, and then we'll go ahead and check what is the change that we can observe, or is there anything new added in the default website, and hopefully that will be multi-factor of Web Service SDK. So if I'll navigate to default website. That's what I'm getting here. Now, if I click on browse, the most expected error would be 403. That's it, forbidden, because this is something which requires a SSL binding, a secure communication. Now, the fundamental behind this is that, as we all know, that Web Service SDK, this is basically a list of all the endpoints that are actually used to complete second factor authentication. This means what? Every communication that is happening under the hood should be secured. So now you have two options basically, that if you have internal CA, you can go ahead and request a SSL cert. But if you don't have internal CS setup, or you're doing something for your lab environment or for a POC, just click on this server on which the IIS has been installed. Click on server certificates and then click on create self-signed certificate. Just name anything over here. So likewise, the host name of this particular machine is MFA. So the server that you guys see here, I have created this server from this particular machine itself, and what I have done is I have named that to mfa.conceptswork.com. Now what I'll do is I'll go back and I'll just bind this particular certificate with the default website, and it should work. Now, before we click on browse 443, let's restart the IIS service, and we should be able to now browse it. The most expected behavior, or the behavior that we will observe now, will be that I should be prompted to enter username password. So I've clicked on browse, and there's something wrong which I have done, and that is that I have browsed the default website. I have to browse multi-factor auth web service SDK. Now the moment I clicked on this, perfect. Now I'm getting a username password prompt. Now this is something which is very important, and I would like to show you this on a machine on which I have Active Directory installed. So this is my another server on which I have Active Directory installed, and the account that I'm going to use here will be EA. Now, the reason behind this is that the account that you're going to sign in for the very first time, or the account that you're going to check whether Web Service SDK is working as expected or not, make sure that that particular account should be a part of phone factor admin group. So I'll go back to my machine where I have Web Service SDK installed, and I will sign in with my EA account. And I should be able to see now all the list of the endpoints that are used by Web Service SDK. Now, one more thing which is important, and that has to be fixed before you proceed, and that is something that, since I'm browsing this on localhost, I'm getting a certificate warning. But as soon as I should browse this on my host name of this particular machine, I should not get any error. And this is something which has to be fixed if you are getting a certificate warning. So make sure that you should not get any certificate warning while accessing Web Service SDK on the machine on which you have installed Web Service SDK, and on the machine on which you have ADFS, where we are actually going to configure ADFS adapter. Now, as you know that this is something which is a list of all the endpoints, but if you want to know more, just click on any of the endpoints and you'll come to know the SOAP requests that are used to go ahead and make any changes, or how a particular endpoint, or more information relative to all the endpoints. Everything in terms of the schema that's being used, anything for a specific particular endpoint can be checked from here. So now what you need to do is you have to copy this particular link from here and remove this part which says OP is equals to activate. So for this demo, I have already done this. So if I paste this link and if I remove this part, it'll be something like this only. So this is the link which should be accessible from your ADFS machine as well. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to my machine on which I have ADFS, and here I will launch a browser. I will try accessing that link, and I'll make sure that I should be able to access that particular link without any certificate warning. So that's it. I can access this particular link now. Now, in order to proceed with the installation of adapter, MFA adapter for ADFS, you need 4 files from MFA server. And those 4 files can be found in this particular location. C, program files, multi-factor authentication server, multi-factor authentication ADFS adapter setup 64. This is actually the setup file, the installation file. Multi-factor authentication ADFS adapter.config. This is the configuration file which is actually going to hardcode the ADFS adapter to contact the web service SDK which is hosted on this particular machine, which is my MFA server. You also need these 2 particular files, which is register multi-factor authentication ADFS adapter and unregister multi-factor authentication ADFS adapter, because these are the 2 scripts which will actually register the adapter for ADFS. And after registering the ADFS adapter, you will see one more option getting listed in the multi-factor list, and that will be of Azure multi-factor authentication server. Now, for this demo, I have already copied these 4 files to my machine on which I have ADFS. And now what I'll do, I'll switch to my ADFS machine and we'll begin with the installation of the MFA adapter. Now, in order to install MFA adapter, you have to run the file which is multi-factor authentication ADFS adapter. Again, this will also doesn't need any configuration, any core configuration. It will simply install the MFA adapter and it will make a specific library available on this particular machine, which will actually help the PowerShell script to get the MFA adapter registered with ADFS. In the meanwhile, if I go here and if I click on edit, what you will see, none of the option is getting listed here as Azure multi-factor authentication server. But the moment we will register the MFA adapter, Azure multi-factor authentication server should start getting listed here. So the moment this setup will be completed, what we will be doing is we will be making a slight change or some of the changes in the file, in the configuration file, and then we'll register the MFA adapter. Okay, so now MFA adapter for ADFS is installed on this particular machine. The next step that we have to do is we have to register this configuration file. Now I'll click on edit with notepad, and this is how the default configuration of this particular file is actually available. Now the very first thing that has to be changed is that use Web Service SDK has to be set to be true, and Web Service SDK URL. Okay, so now this URL is the same URL that we have actually copied from the machine on which we have installed Web Service SDK. So I'll copy this URL from here and I'll go back and I'll paste that URL here. Now the next thing that we have to do is we have to enter the credential of the user account, and we are going to use the same account with which we tried checking whether Web Service SDK is working as expected or not. And the moment we'll type in the details of those account, username and password, that's it. We have to save this file now. Now, one more thing that I would like to tell you, that please make sure that this account that you guys have selected, that should be a part of Phone Factor admin group. Now, what we will do is we will go back to the location where we have all the files, and we will launch PowerShell, and we will navigate to this particular location, and then we will run the script that will register the MFA adapter. But before we go ahead and simply register this MFA adapter script, or we start this MFA adapter script, there is one more slight change that has to be completed, and that is by default when you will copy the script from the MFA server, you don't find this option getting listed or this parameter with the value getting mentioned here. And this is something which you have to manually add, and that is configuration file path and then just the complete link or the complete address of the file where the configuration file exists. So this file is the same file which exists in a folder named as MFA, which is in the C drive. And what I have done is I have added this location as -configuration file path. Now, if I'll go back here and I'll save this, it's already saved. Now I'll go back and I will register this particular script. Now what it does, this says that I have to restart the ADFS service. I will restart the ADFS service. I will close the ADFS console. And once the ADFS service is restarted, I will launch the ADFS service again. And then what we will do is we will try signing in with an account on Office 365 application, and let's see if it works or not. So now the next thing that we have to do is we have to go ahead and launch ADFS. And here I should get an option now of Azure Multi-Factor Authentication Server. In the authentication methods, if I go to multi-factor authentication, and that's what I'm getting now, I'll click on apply. Okay. Now I'll go to my relying party trust and I'll check what is the option that is selected, whether the users will be prompted for MFA or not. And that's what you see here, permit everyone and require MFA. I'll click on OK. Now everything is completed when it comes to configuration. A quick overview. The very first thing that we need to do is we have to install Web Service SDK. We have to copy these 4 files from this particular server, that means MFA server, to your ADFS machine. We have to run the installation file, MFA adapter file. We have to configure the MFA adapter configuration file wherein we will customize the Web Service SDK URL, username and password, and that too, that user name should be, or that user account should be a part of Phone Factor admin group. And then we will register the adapter from this particular script. Now what I will do is I will launch a browser and I will try to sign in with the account which is currently enabled for MFA. That is something which you can check from your MFA server itself. So if I'll go back here and if I click on user, this is the account which is currently enabled. So what I'll do is I'll sign in a browser to portal.office.com, and then I'll go back and sign in with my account, which is work1 at conceptswork.com. This is something which is actually configured for MFA. And since my domain is federated, I've been redirected to my ADFS page, and I'll sign in here with the username and password. And the next option is that I am getting a call on my cell phone. Now, this is how the entire MFA work. And yes, I am getting a call, and the moment I will verify the second factor authentication, I should be signed in now to portal.office.com, and that to the home page of the application. So this was all about how you can configure ADFS with MFA server. If you guys have any questions, queries, or suggestion, please feel free to reach me at learnconceptswork@gmail.com, and I will be happy to answer all of your queries. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day ahead. Bye bye.